Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for our live telephone town hall event. My name is Kelsey and I'm here today with physician and U.S. Senator Rand Paul. We're looking forward to taking your live calls and discussing a whole range of issues that are important to Kentucky and the nation. We're excited to be live streaming this teletown hall event today on both our website and our Facebook page. You can go to paul.senate.gov/live or facebook.com/Senator Rand Paul to watch right now. And if your friends or family couldn't join us today, they'll be able to access that video anytime on our page. If you have a question for Senator Paul, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad now or at any time. Again, that is *3 to ask a question. If you would like to be added to our weekly e-newsletter, please press 1 at any time during this call. I'll now turn it over to Senator Paul.
Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks for everybody for joining in. Probably the biggest topic still people are talking about is the virus. You know, when are we going to be over with this pandemic? When can we get back to normal? The virus seems to be getting less each day. We've gone through several waves, at least 3 big waves of the virus. But the daily incidence seems to be going down and the deaths seem to be going down. A lot of us know people who have died from this. A lot of people know people have been sick. And then fortunately, a lot of us know people who've gotten the disease and not gotten too sick and gotten better and now have immunity. So I think we are going to get beyond this. It's just a matter of time. I think when we get beyond this, we have to have our freedoms intact, and we don't want to live in a world where we have to present papers to go places or where employers and the government demand certain things of us that really are private, personal medical decisions. And I think this is important that we have this discussion and we talk about how in a free country, basically your medical decisions are private. We actually have laws. There was a law passed in Washington about 20 years ago called HIPAA, which says that your decisions are yours. They're private and you're to make them. And now some people say, oh, well, but if you don't get vaccinated, you can infect someone else. Well, the truth of the matter is you could get vaccinated and still infect others as well. I think the vaccine protects you from getting as sick as you might get if you're not vaccinated. So I'm pro taking the vaccine, particularly if you're at risk, if you're over 65 or overweight at almost any age. But the thing is in a free country, it ought to be your decision. No one should force you to do it. And it ought to be based on science. If the government's going to tell you you have to take something, shouldn't they base it on science? So one of the things they should have to explain to people is that over 100 million Americans got COVID. I got it. I didn't get very sick, luckily, and now I have immunity to it. So the question is my immunity any less value than someone who got vaccinated? You know, the studies are pretty convincing on this. They say that the immunity you get from getting the disease naturally is as good or maybe even better than the vaccine. Now look, this is not an argument for getting COVID. People do get very sick, and I don't want people to think that anybody wants you to get this. But 100 million Americans got it, and they didn't want to get it, and they survived, and now they have immunity. I think that should count for something. When you think about it, the doctors and the nurses and those who work in a hospital, they took care of all of us for over the last, year and a half. They risked their lives to try to help us get over this disease. And many of them caught COVID, now have immunity, but their employers are demanding that they get vaccinated. Well, there's not really science to say that you have to be vaccinated after you've already gotten it, because you have immunity. In fact, the largest study on this comes out of Israel. 2.5 million people in Israel were studied. A large group of them had been vaccinated, but had not gotten the disease naturally, and a large group had gotten the disease naturally, but chose not to be vaccinated. What they found is that the people who got the disease naturally were 7 times less likely to get the disease or to be hospitalized from the disease than those who'd been vaccinated. So really, for employers to differentiate and say, oh, those who got a vaccine are so much better people, and those who got it naturally are somehow going to be segregated and fired and punished if they don't get vaccinated, really doesn't make scientific sense. Right now, the estimates from the CDC are that over 100, maybe 120 million people have had COVID and survived. So I think we really need to take this into account. The other question is whether or not your kids should be vaccinated. I think each parent should get to make that decision, and the schools shouldn't force you to get vaccinated to go to school. I mean, we all pay taxes. We don't have any choice on paying the school taxes. They shouldn't dictate that you have to make certain medical decisions to go to school. This is not a deadly disease for children. They're not good transmitters primarily in this disease. And the question is, particularly children who've already had COVID, is there a possibility that side effects of the vaccine might be worse than the disease for these kids, particularly kids who have already had it? So if, as a physician, someone was asking me, should my 15-year-old kid be vaccinated? I would say, as a physician, I'd get them tested for antibodies to see if they've already had the disease. If they've already had the disease, I don't really think there's a medical reason for them to be vaccinated. If you talk to Dr. Fauci and the big government types in Washington, they'll say nobody should think about anything and really that the government should make the decision and everyone should just submit to taking a vaccine. I think that's a mistake, and it's also discounting that there is a significant side effect in some children, particularly male teenagers, of an inflammation of the heart that can happen after the vaccine. So while I'm all for taking the vaccine voluntarily for those at risk, those who are older, and particularly those who are overweight, and anybody else who voluntarily wants to take it, I really don't think we should be forcing this on our children. It's based on bad science, and Dr. Fauci also being, I think, deceptive in the way he's presenting the data, because he says, oh, we have a shortage of people being vaccinated. The truth is actually the opposite. Over age 65, 90% or more of America has chosen to get vaccinated voluntarily. So actually the numbers of those who are vaccinated is very, very good. Over 90% of those over 65, those who are at high risk. If you drop the age down to 50, really probably 75% of America has chosen to be vaccinated over 50. So when they say not enough people are being vaccinated, I don't think they're really being honest. Those who are at high risk, the vast majority of those at high risk have been vaccinated. England has looked at this and said, well, gosh, the vaccine's okay, but it's not working perfectly, so we're giving boosters to those at risk. That's reasonable. But England made the decision that, you know what, we're not going to force this on children. We're going to keep emphasizing continued vaccines for the elderly because that's where the death rate is highest. To give you an example of the difference in death rate, if you're 80 years old, your chances of dying from COVID are 10,000 times greater than a 10-year-old. So this really is a different disease for young people than it is for the elderly, and we shouldn't say one size fits all. In addition to taking the vaccine as a preventative, the good news is there's actually treatment out now too. There is a treatment called monoclonal antibodies that if you get in time can actually lower your chance of being hospitalized or dying by about 70%. That's remarkable and something everybody should know about. Unfortunately, Dr. Fauci's been talking so much about these cloth masks and wearing them all over his face and all over his head that they don't really work very well. And in fact, there's no evidence that wearing these cloth masks have reduced the incidence of the disease. In fact, the incidence of the disease has gone up in every venue where people were wearing masks. But I think in emphasizing the wearing of cloth masks, he's actually gotten away from treatments that actually could save your life, like the monoclonal antibodies. But there's a couple things you need to know. Because Dr. Fauci's in charge of all medicine for the entire country, if not the whole world, people across the country are saying, oh, I can't do this because Dr. Fauci doesn't approve and the government doesn't approve. So if you get sick, you need to realize that if your doctor says you may need to go into the hospital, you have to ask your doctor, can I have the monoclonal antibodies first? In fact, if they're wheeling you towards the hospital, you need to say, wait a minute, stop in the emergency room because I want the monoclonal antibody treatment. If they admit you to the hospital, we've heard of several cases around Kentucky and policy dictated by national hospitals saying that once you're an inpatient, they won't give you the monoclonal antibodies. So if anybody listening to this phone call gets sick, particularly if you're over 65 and get COVID, ask your doctor for the monoclonal antibodies and make sure you don't wait too long. If you have symptoms for more than 10 days, they won't give you the monoclonal antibodies either. Now, I don't agree with these restrictions coming from Dr. Fauci, but you may run into them. So be aware if you or somebody in your family gets sick, ask for the monoclonal antibodies and try not to get admitted to the hospital before they've given you the infusion of the monoclonal antibodies. In addition to these antibody treatments, there's also another treatment called inhaled steroids. A lot of people who have asthma take inhaled steroids all the time, people with COPD or emphysema take inhaled steroids.
Access live event is in music hold.
It looks like that there has been some reduction in the severity of the disease by taking these inhaled steroids early on. This is another question that you can ask your doctor. I think it's disappointing that this has become politicized. I think we should try to get to the bottom of where the COVID virus came from. There's a lot of evidence now that it came from the lab in China. This is important because we don't want this to happen again. Unfortunately, Dr. Fauci has resisted this investigation and has denied that they funded research in China that might have caused this disease. But the evidence is mounting that there's been a cover-up. The evidence is mounting that this disease did originate in a laboratory. Two big pieces of information. Number one, the wet markets where they sell these exotic animals in Wuhan and in parts of China, they tested 80,000 animals and they didn't find any animals that were positive for COVID. So they didn't find an animal host for this. It looks like it just showed up one day in humans. That argues for this coming from a lab and not evolving and coming from animals. The other large piece of evidence is they looked at thousands of blood samples from people in China in 2019 to see if any of them had antibodies to COVID already. If this came naturally, usually it comes slowly before it comes quickly, and you'll find in the very early stages some sporadic cases of people who had COVID in 2019. Well, they looked through, I believe, 9,000 samples and they found nobody with COVID. This argues very strongly for this disease having come from the lab as well. When we've questioned Dr. Fauci on this, though, he says, oh, we weren't doing that kind of research there and we didn't fund it. Well, it turns out that the NIH, which Dr. Fauci is a big part of, did fund research in Wuhan and continues to send money over there. Your money is going to Wuhan to fund research. In this research, they take an unknown virus from a bat cave and they combine it with another virus that can cause pandemics, and then they try to find out whether or not the new virus they create in the lab could cause illness. Well, lo and behold, they have found that it does cause illness, and Dr. Fauci still won't admit that this kind of research was gain of function, meaning the virus gained the function or gained lethality. The virus gained in dangerousness when they combine these viruses. Well, this is a crazy kind of research. We shouldn't be doing it in China. We certainly shouldn't be funding it with taxpayer money, but we also should not be doing it in America. There are two labs in America, one in Galveston and one in North Carolina, that are still doing this research, and I'm sure they're still doing this research in Wuhan. Your taxpayer dollars are still going to China. When Dr. Fauci's asked about it, he says, oh yeah, he's still in favor of sending your money to China to do this research. I think that's a terrible idea, and it may well have been the cause. We don't have proof that it was the cause, but we do think that this kind of experiments could have created the virus that is the pandemic. When Dr. Fauci was asked about this in 2012, he said, well, you know, I'm for gain-of-function research, and sure, scientists could get infected and we could get a pandemic, but it would be worth it. He said that it would be worth it even if we had a pandemic because the knowledge would be worth it. I think the 5 million people have died so far, and their families probably would beg to differ with Dr. Fauci and say, you know what, maybe the knowledge you think you would have gained maybe wasn't worth the loss of my loved one. We have to investigate this. There hasn't been any investigation. I've asked the heads of the committees, who are Democrats, to investigate where this virus came from. We have not had one hearing, 0 hearings on investigating where this virus came from. I'm going to keep pushing for this. We need to, because you know what? This virus had a 1% mortality, and that meant right now over 750,000 Americans have lost their lives from this. Can you imagine if this had 15% mortality or 50% mortality? Some of the viruses that they're experimenting with in these gain-of-function research that Dr. Fauci supports have 15% mortality. Some of the viruses have 50% mortality. This is alarming, it's crazy, and it should come to a stop. Everybody on the phone call should know I stand up every day and ask the questions, how did this virus start? How did this pandemic start? And what do we do to stop it? This is consuming a lot of our time, but we have other things that we're active with and interested in. One of the things we introduced in the last week or so is to try to make college tax deductible. College has become so expensive and so many people have loans that they can't repay, and that we really need to make it easier on working families to pay for college. So we introduced a bill to make college tax deductible, which we think will help people in Kentucky, but across the country. We also introduced a bill to say that when you develop drugs, that you don't have to use animals in the testing. Since 1938, the federal government has required that you test all drugs on animals. Well, I think the science has advanced beyond that. Some of these experiments are cruel. One of the experiments currently they've been talking about is on beagles in Tunisia, where their vocal cords are actually cut so that the dogs can't be heard when they cry out in pain. I mean, that is torture as far as I'm concerned. They've been giving the dogs anesthesia so their eyes can't blink, and then infesting their eyes with sand flies. I think this is really just disturbing, some of this research that's going on. And it's the same set of people. It's Dr. Fauci once again in charge of all of this. So I think there needs to be investigation of animal research. I'm not for banning it, because if we save human lives, there will be some animal research that I think is valid. But we should look at all of it, and we shouldn't be doing it, willy-nilly or without very strong reasons for doing this. So I have legislation to allow scientists to look for options so we don't have to do animal testing. One of the big things we're hearing as we go around Kentucky is rising prices. Everywhere you go, grocery stores, gas pump, the prices are through the roof. People need to connect the dots on this. Inflation isn't a mystery. It happens when you print up too much money because you borrowed too much money because you gave people free stuff. So when politicians say, hey, we're going to give you free college, or we're going to give you free cell phones or free daycare, realize it's not free. In fact, you're already paying for it. Last year, both parties said they were going to send you checks, and they did send you checks because they locked the economy up because of COVID. I don't think they saved any lives by shutting the economy down, but they certainly spent a lot of money we didn't have. So we borrowed $3 trillion last year. That borrowed money was then printed up by the Federal Reserve, and that's why your prices at the pump are going up. That's why your prices in the grocery store are going up. In addition, the prices at the gas pump are going up because the Biden administration has shut down exploration and pumping of oil and gas out of the ground. So really, this is a self-imposed problem. Government is the problem. The Biden administration specifically is against energy, and so they're trying to forbid and limit the production of fossil fuels, oil and gas, and coal. So we do need to stand up to them, because the people who pay the price are ordinary citizens, particularly people on fixed income, Social Security, people also on lower wages get hurt the worst when inflation happens at the pumps. So there's a lot on our plate. One additional thing, and then we'll get to questions. I'm alarmed by calls for defunding the police. We've had a lot of violence in our cities across the country, but to defund the police, I think, will make the problem worse. I've traveled around Kentucky. I've been meeting with law enforcement, with sheriffs and deputies, with police officers and police chiefs. And to a person, they're worried about these calls to defund the police. I think that police are part of a civilized society. They're a part of keeping the peace. And it would be a real mistake to have no police. And so I think all of us, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, need to resist this. So legislation up here to defund the police, I've opposed. Any legislation in Kentucky to defund the police, I oppose, and will continue to. With that, Kelsey, why don't we go to some questions?
Great. Thank you so much for that. Again, you can ask a question by pressing *3 on your telephone keypad at any time. I'll also be keeping an eye on our online submissions and our Facebook page and website. Before we get to the phones, I just wanted to remind everyone that our office is always here to help if you have any issues with federal agencies. We know that navigating the massive federal bureaucracy can be confusing, frustrating, and downright overwhelming, but you don't have to face this challenge alone. Our office has a proven track record of helping Kentuckians untangle red tape, get results, and resolve long-standing concerns. We are always ready to help with matters involving federal government agencies and programs, including veterans benefits, Social Security and Medicare benefits, federal tax matters in the IRS, immigration matters, passports, military academy nominations, federal student loans, and replacing lost or damaged documents such as VA records and military medals and records. So, if you live in Kentucky and you need help with these and other issues with federal agencies and programs, please don't hesitate to contact us by visiting our website at www.paul.senate.gov or by calling our Bowling Green office at 270-782-8303. Additionally, if you would like to be added to our weekly e-newsletter, please press 1 on your telephone keypad at any time. We will now go to our first question from Rebecca Reckers. Go ahead, Rebecca. You are live with the senator.
Hi there. Thank you, Senator Paul. I read an article in Forbes about your plan to propose a tax-free education act. I love this. I was wondering what the plan is to garner support on both sides of the aisle, and if there is going to be any removal of the phase-out income requirement to take advantage of this program. Thank you.
Yes, on removing the phase out, we're going to let people deduct the entire cost, not just of interest on your college education, but the whole loan. The other thing we do is a lot of people get out of college. Let's say you have $100,000 worth of loans, but you don't make $100,000 a year. You make $40,000 a year. We let you deduct it over time. So maybe somebody making $40,000 a year deducts $100,000 a year over many, many years, and they can deduct the whole cost. The way I look at college is an expense, and it's a business expense. Let's just make it like an ordinary business expense, and you can deduct it. So if your parents pay for it, we let them deduct it as well. We don't have an income cap, so any parent could deduct it. If your aunt helps you, if your uncle helps you, if your grandmother helps you, all of them can use the deduction. And then you can also, if you have savings and your savings is there, you can actually use savings from your IRA if you want to do it that way. But I think if we legalize this, what will happen is people currently who save for their kids save in after-tax money. Now they'll be able to save with pre-tax money. But that means your savings on college could be 25 to 33 to 40% cheaper depending on your tax bracket. So yeah, we get rid of the phase out so we don't limit who can do this. And I think everybody ought to make it tax deductible. As far as getting Democrats on board, we've tried. We don't have anybody so far. Right now, they're feeling their oats and they think they can just make college free. The reason I oppose college being free is that everybody would go, it would be free, it would be overutilized, and will incur much more debt. With my plan being tax deductible, it helps you, but you can't get a tax deduction unless you work. So essentially, making college tax deductible instills a work requirement to get your benefit. So if you go to college and you don't work and you have no income, you don't get it to deduct anything. You have to be a worker to get deduction. So I think ours is a more realistic way of going. But right now, the Democrats are sort of hell-bent on just making everything free, which basically means you'll pay for it either through inflation, taxes, or ultimately maybe even the destruction of the dollar. So I think this is a more prudent way to do it. We're going to keep trying for Democrat co-sponsors, but we don't have any yet.
All right. Before we go to our next question, we have a very special guest here today. Okay. So I'm not sure if anybody's heard of the Flat Stanley program, but Ms. Charlotte Bream from Pikeville Elementary School brought this friend here. She sent this to us and she asked if we could take him on some adventures, and we figured what better way than to come to a live telephone town hall.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be me, but the hair's not messy enough to be me. So this must be Flat Stanley. We welcome him to D.C. And Charlotte, I'm going to be in Pikeville recently. Maybe we'll bring him back to you.
All right.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Newsom from Pikeville Elementary, for putting this whole project together. We appreciate it. All right, we'll go ahead to our next question now. Mrs. Jill Smith, you are live with Senator Paul. Go ahead and ask your question.
Senator Paul, I think probably the biggest threat to America is the bill they're trying to pass, Biden's bill, going to monitor our bank transactions, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, going to tax our mileage, which will destroy the economy and destroy everybody's ability to do anything. Why aren't the Republicans doing something about this?
Yeah.
This is fundamental. Something's got to be done. It's got to be stopped.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I will tell you that I believe Republicans are united in opposing this. There won't be one Republican vote to allow the government to look at your bank account and your transactions. We are united in opposing this. So we have been speaking out. Sometimes the media doesn't carry our message, so we might not have gotten it through to everybody yet, but we continue to fight this. I've heard more phone calls and more letters and more emails on this subject than anything else in a long time. The Democrat proposal was that if you have more than $600 going through your account in a year, they were going to audit you and look at all of your transactions. Well, there was an outcry, so now they've changed it to $10,000. But realize $27 a day is $10,000, and if you earn more than $10,000 a year, in all likelihood, more than $10,000 goes through your bank account in a year. When we looked at the statistics on this, 75% of the people that are going to be looking at their accounts will make less than $100,000 a year. So this gives lie to Biden saying, oh, we're only going to go after people who make $400,000 a year. This proposal to snoop on your bank account, 75% of the people's bank accounts that they're going to look at make less than $100,000 a year. And you're right, this does go against the Fourth Amendment. This is an unreasonable search without a warrant. You look at all the checks a person writes, you're looking at very personal activities, you're looking at who their doctor is, who their church is, you're looking at a lot of different activities that people engage in, what kind of material they read. So I'm absolutely opposed to this. We are fighting tooth and nail on it. And the more you write and call legislators, the better chance we have. Your two senators are opposed to this provision in Kentucky. The one that I would really write and who has a lot of influence right now is Senator Manchin from West Virginia. So people should send him letters saying you don't want them looking at your bank account, because in the end, he's probably going to vote for the final proposal, but he does have some influence over what goes in the final proposal. And if we can convince him that it's a bad idea, maybe we'll dodge this bullet. But I'm with you.
All right. Again, you can ask a question by pressing *3 on your telephone keypad at any time. And asking a question isn't the only way you can get in touch with us. You can always call our office, visit our website, or write us a letter. As you saw with Flat Stanley, we do receive your letters. And for those of you just joining us, our office is always here to help. If you have any issues with all the federal agencies, I will go back through that when we finish here and list those out and how to contact us again. We'll go ahead and get to our next question because we have a lot of callers. Let's go to Mr. Little. Mr. Little, you are live with Senator Paul. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Senator Paul. I'm very concerned with the border crisis. I see it as a national security threat, public health threat, and a threat to our sovereignty. With the views of the current administration, what can be done about this crisis?
Well, I think the Biden administration sent the exactly wrong signal to the world. They basically said, come, that there would be no more border limits. And I think it is terrible. A country has to have borders or it's not really a country. I agree with you. It's a national security risk. And here's the great irony. The Biden administration is firing our border control agents, the people who patrol the border. They're firing them if they're not vaccinated, but they're admitting tens of thousands of people daily who are not vaccinated. So it's fine if you're an illegal alien to be not vaccinated, but the people guarding the border have to be vaccinated. Many of them have already had the disease anyway. But this is a real insult that the government is firing people who are trying to protect the country from an invasion, and then the people who are invading our country, we can't test them for COVID. And then what they do is they're dispersing them throughout the country. So they're sending people on nighttime flights to rural Tennessee and rural Kentucky with folks who came here, broke into the country, and they say, oh, come back in a month for your trial on whether or not you came in here illegally. And none of them come back. And they're all here to stay. And the Democrats are complicit on this. But ultimately, it overburdens our hospitals. It overburdens our schools. And it's not the way to go about it. I'm in favor of immigration, lawful immigration, do it the right way. But I'm for zero tolerance on this. If I were in charge, I'd do what President Trump did. He had a remain in Mexico policy. When you came to the border and you try to get across, we stop you and you stay in Mexico and you got to adjudicate your claim. If you want asylum or however you're trying to get in, you do it in Mexico. When we did that, the people in Central America saw that President Trump was was going to stand firm and that he was tough, and they quit coming in the big migrant bans. As soon as President Trump, was gone, and as soon as President Biden was in, they saw weakness, and they saw a party that doesn't care how many people come in, and so they came by the tens of hundreds of thousands. I think we're talking about over 1 million now have come. So it is a disaster. It's a national security emergency, and we should put all our effort into it. Instead, everything Biden has done has been to stop the wall construction, to cause border agents to be fired. So it is something we have to do something about, and I'm with you on it.
All right, we'll go ahead to our next question now. As I said earlier, if you go to paul.senate.gov/live, that is where you can ask questions in the little chat box if you're not on the phones. So this is a question from James. He says, Dr. Paul, what do you think of the keyword warrants that the FBI has issued on tech companies? Is it against the Fourth Amendment and gross abuse of power? And these are the keyword warrants where they'll issue it and say, anybody that searches these keywords, we're gonna go after them.
The Fourth Amendment says that the government can, under very limited circumstances, come into your house or listen to your phone or eavesdrop on your computer. They have to have probable cause that you've committed a crime, and then the seeking of records or tapping your phone has to be specific to an individual and a place and a bit of information that you want. So when you say, I want everybody who searched for, migrant, immigration abuse or whatever, or looked for certain terms like that, and you want everybody, now you've set a dragnet that is a broad, wide open, what some might call a generalized warrant, because it doesn't have an individual you're going after. And so, like, for example, let's say you searched the terms Alec Baldwin and the accidental shooting that happened, the tragic shooting that happened. If you search that, somehow they might think you're linked somehow to that terrible accident that happened. And so then, 1 million people search that term, and so then they'd look at all of the records. That's not consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So I'm opposed to these broad warrants, and I think that they really should be struck down as unconstitutional.
All right, we'll go to our next question now. We have Sarah Milligan. You are live with Dr. Paul. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Senator. As a mother of 3 small boys and a puppy, thank you for everything you've been doing to keep our family safe and our constitutional rights sacred. We really appreciate it. I'm interested in the NIH letter to Representative Comer regarding gain-of-function research. I studied the complex ethics of gain-of-function research when I was getting my master's in public health, and it interested me primarily from a standpoint of bioterrorism. Did you read any articles about gain-of-function before 2020 bioterrorism was considered a serious concern regarding this type of research? In 2015, gain-of-function research was halted by President Obama because of the complex concerns surrounding it. My question is, what are the chances that there will be any follow-up regarding why we would pay for our biggest international threat to conduct such research behind the curtain of communism? And was this research conducted during the time period when it was halted by President Obama? Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, this is a great question and goes to the heart of the matter with this gain of function. So gain of function research is when you take a virus and combine it with another virus to see if it gains function, to see if it now will infect humans, whereas it previously wouldn't have. Now, you can do it for research, for vaccines. I'm not so sure it's necessary, but you could also do it for bioterrorism if you specifically wanted to develop a weapon. In China, there are military labs that are doing experiments that we aren't really privy to because they don't report their findings. And then there's a Wuhan Institute that the NIH was funding. Many of us believe that there is really a lot of joint work going on between the Chinese military and these labs, and that there's not really a real difference or separation between these labs. Now, whether or not the Chinese could have done this on purpose and released it, I think it's unlikely. I can't say for sure because, they would obviously be putting their own population at risk. I think it's more likely to be accidental release. But there are people who have reported that they do think that the Chinese military is experimenting with these as a biological weapon. So you're right. Why in the world would we be giving money to a country that we're often an adversary with giving money for them to develop a weapon that might be used on us or the entire world. It makes no sense at all. But we haven't gotten very far in investigating this because not one Democrat, not one committee controlled by Democrats will allow us to investigate this. There has been zero investigation of the origins of this and whether or not we should be funding this type of research. In fact, Dr. Fauci keeps coming forward and saying it wasn't gain of function research. But realize what his argument is. His argument is this: if you don't know that the virus that you create is going to gain function or gain in dangerousness, if you don't know that in advance, then the experiment is okay. Well, that's a crazy standard because you never know in advance when you create a new virus, whether it's going to gain in function or not. That's what the experiment is. But we shouldn't be doing it with very, very dangerous viruses. The one they've been combining with is the SARS virus, which has a 15% mortality, and they've been taking unknown bat viruses and combining these. It's a recipe for a disaster. It's a recipe for a plague or a pandemic. We shouldn't be doing it. But you're right, we should also think about the bioterror, that some of this research that we've now been sharing with the Chinese could actually be used to develop a weapon that could wipe out mankind. So this is incredibly dangerous. But not one Democrat has been willing to do any investigation of this. It's still being funded. The money is still going to Wuhan, and the money's still going to American labs to do this as well. So if I get in charge of this committee, which there's a possibility I will be, there will be an investigation of this.
Okay, we'll go ahead to our next question now. Here we go. Brian, you are live with Dr. Paul. Go ahead and ask your question.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Brian Ambergy. I live in Winchester. I'm a Kentucky advocate for Camp Lejeune toxic water survivors. There's a piece of legislation that's in the House of Representatives right now, toxic exposure in the American military. I wanted to see what your thoughts was on getting this into law to help everyone from Camp Lejeune to the burn pits to Agent Orange.
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions over time about, different toxic effects that veterans have had to be around, whether it's, burning fires, oil fires, chemical fires, Agent Orange. This has been going on quite a while now. I think that when you serve in the military, that it's the obligation of society and of the government and of the taxpayers to assess, the risks, assess what was going on, and assess whether or not anything that happened to our veterans happened because of exposure to these things. So yes, I think it ought to be investigated and that veterans ought to be compensated if they were somehow, to me it's the same as being injured by a bullet. If you were injured by an environmental exposure, you should be covered as a wounded veteran because you were wounded in the duty to your country. So as far as the specifics on each individual thing, there's a lot of specific individual factual information that if you have information and you want to call us, Kelsey's going to repeat the number. We're happy to talk to you individually and see if we can learn more about if you have any information you want to provide us, or if you're a veteran and this is something specific to you that you'd like us to know about or help you with the VA, we're happy to do that. Why don't you repeat the phone number again?
So the phone number for everyone, and this is our Bowling Green office, it is 270-782-8303. And we are always ready to help with any matters involving federal government agencies and programs, including, I'm going to go over a few of these for everyone if there's anyone that's just joined. We are happy to help with veterans benefits, Social Security and Medicare benefits, federal tax matters in the IRS, immigration matters, passports, military academy nominations, federal student loans, and replacing lost or damaged documents such as VA records and military medals and records. So if you live in Kentucky and you need help with these and other issues with federal agencies and programs, especially our veterans, we love taking care of our veterans. I know a lot of you across the state know Miss Bobette. You can contact us again by visiting our website. That's paul.senate.gov, or calling our Bowling Green office at 270-782-8303. Okay, want to go to our next question now. Let's see. Let's take one of the write-in questions here. Laura wrote in and asked, Do you believe that the president mandating a vaccination is a violation of our rights, especially mandating businesses to make their employees get it?
Yes, absolutely. I'm against the vaccine mandates from a persuasive or voluntary point of view. I think if you're at risk, taking a vaccine is a good idea, but I would never mandate it on you. I think that in a free society, you make your own medical decisions. I think an executive order that's not passed by the legislation or legislature is unconstitutional. I don't think the president has the right to do that. I also think that there are Supreme Court precedents that say you do have a right to decide what is injected into your body. I think that you have a privacy right and a medical right to make those decisions yourself. So I think that the mandate in all likelihood will be struck down by the courts. There are a bunch of court cases going. A lot of businesses are joining these court cases. The more businesses that support and join the court cases, the better chance we have of actually succeeding. People need to realize also how crazy it is to tell essential workers that we're going to fire you. So if a third of the doctors quit, a third of the nurses quit, a third of the pilots quit, a third of the people, the air traffic controllers quit, a third of the meat packers quit, these are realistic numbers. We are going to have chaos. There won't be any food on the shelves. There won't be fresh meat. There won't be fresh vegetables. All the things that we expect to have at our beck and call in the grocery store, they may just dry up if we all of a sudden are telling all of these essential workers you can't come to work. It's also incredibly insulting. If you were a doctor or a nurse or anybody working in a hospital, they risk their lives to take care of us. They showed up every day for work when there's no certain cure for COVID. We have treatment, but no certain cure. And there was no vaccine for most of the time they worked. Many of them got the disease. They survived and they have immunity now. And we're going to tell them, oh, you're just yesterday's trash and we no longer want you. I think it's just despicable. But you know who I blame the most? Dr. Fauci. It all comes downhill. It all flows downhill from him. The advice that he gives is being taken by hospital presidents and CEOs across the country. And I think it's a great disservice to our workers and our frontline responders that we're firing them. And I hope people will rise up, push back, and let them know, look, this is America. This isn't Soviet Russia. Let's allow people the freedom to make their own choice.
All right, I think we'll go to our last question now. All right, Caden Morin, go ahead. You are live with Dr. Paul. You can ask your question.
All right. So I am very interested in the economy, and especially regarding inflation. 30% of all U.S. money has been minted in the past year. And what's your plan to combat that, really?
Well, the reason you get inflation is the government creates new money. And so if the government doubles the supply of money, you can see how more money chasing the same amount of goods, the prices would rise. It's not always mathematical, but you could imagine that if you doubled the amount of money, you might double the price of everything. But prices go on up unevenly. So some sectors of the market will go up more dramatically than others. This increase in prices makes people think that there's more demand or less demand, and it sends signals throughout the economy that also misallocates money, and you get malinvestment, and eventually part of the business cycle is this debt, credit expansion, and then correction, this boom and bust cycle. But inevitably, when you borrow a significant amount of money and the Federal Reserve then buys the Treasury bills, they're injecting money that was created out of nothing. For probably a couple of decades now, America's been buying more goods abroad than we sell to foreigners. So when we buy goods from abroad, our dollars go overseas. So the Fed prints up all this money, but then we buy so much stuff from foreigners that the dollar goes overseas and it stays in other national banks, other countries' banks, and they actually use it as currency in some parts of the world as well. This has allowed us to be the reserve currency and allows us in a way to export our inflation. So I think inflation could be a lot worse, but a lot of these dollars are overseas. If there ever comes a time when the foreign countries sense a weakness in the dollar, begin unloading their dollars and the dollars flow back to the United States, then I think we actually have runaway inflation. Right now we have inflation worse than we've had probably in 15 years. And people need to realize that inflation is the cost of free stuff. The Democrats offer you free college, free cell phones, free daycare, but it's not free. Either you're going to be paying taxes for it if you're a worker, or you're going to be paying inflationary costs at the grocery store or at the gas pump. Nothing in life is really free. And we all instinctively know this, and yet people still sometimes vote and say, well, I want free college or I want free daycare. It's not free. The price you're paying is inflation. It's going to continue to be a price we all pay. I fear that it's going to get worse, but it's why we should reject this $3 trillion monstrosity that's being pushed on us of all this so-called free stuff, because in the end, we're going to pay the penalty of inflation. The working class and retirees on fixed income end up absorbing more of the burden than anybody else because they have less means to be able to pay for the inflated cost of items. But we need to resist this, and it's related to debt. Inflation comes from debt, and it's something that we all need to stand up to, but we have to be able to believe and understand that this is an unintended consequence of offering too many free things that we don't have the money for. Thanks everybody for calling in and joining us today, and we'll do it again in another month or two, but we enjoy the questions. We have this on our website. It'll replay on Facebook as well, and we've enjoyed being with you this evening.
All right, thanks again to everyone who participated and joined in. If you want to stick around real quick, I'm going to go through the ways to contact our office one more time. 270-782-8303 is to call our Bowling Green office. You can also go to our website, paul.senate.gov. And if you go to paul.senate.gov/live and enter your information there, you will be notified of our next Teletown Hall. Thank you again so much for being here with us. We look forward to the next one.